The rain had been falling for 3 days straight when Eliza Morgan finally closed her eyes that April night in 1882, never imagining she would wake to the earth itself trying to swallow her whole. She had built her small cabin on the outskirts of Silver Creek, Colorado, tucked against a hillside that offered protection from the harsh winter winds. The location seemed perfect when she arrived 6 months ago, a young widow of 23 trying to start fresh after losing her husband to fever back in Kansas. The townspeople had warned her about building so close to the slope, but Eliza was stubborn, and the land was cheap. She had used every penny of her small inheritance to buy the plot and construct the modest one-room cabin with help from a few kind neighbors. The storm that rolled through the Colorado mountains that week was unlike anything the region had seen in years. The snow from the brutal winter was still melting in the higher elevations, and when the warm spring rains came, they turned the mountainsides into rivers of mud and debris. Eliza had spent the evening of April 16th reading by lamplight, listening to the steady drum of rain on her wooden roof. She had reinforced the cabin herself, proud of her handiwork, confident in her ability to weather any storm. She was wrong. Sometime around 3 a.m, the hillside gave way. Thousands of pounds of mud, rocks, and uprooted trees came sliding down the slope with a sound like distant thunder. Eliza jerked awake to darkness and a terrifying rumble that seemed to come from the earth itself. Before she could even stand from her bed, the back wall of her cabin exploded inward. Mud poured through like a living thing, cold and suffocating. She screamed as the structure collapsed around her, timbers cracking like gunshots. The weight of the mud pinned her against what remained of her bed frame, pressing against her chest and legs. Her right arm was trapped beneath a fallen beam, and thick, cold mud filled her mouth when she tried to scream again. For several terrifying minutes, Eliza thought she would die there, buried alive in the home she had built with her own hands. She managed to turn her head to the side, spitting out mud, gasping for air in the small pocket that remained around her face. The darkness was absolute. She could not see anything, could not move anything except her left hand and her head. The weight on her chest made every breath a struggle. Panic clawed at her mind, but she forced it down. She had survived her husband's death, survived the journey west alone, survived a hard winter in an unfamiliar land. She would not die like this. Eliza began to scream. She screamed with everything she had, her voice raw and desperate, not knowing if anyone could possibly hear her through the tons of mud and debris. She screamed until her throat burned, then screamed some more. She screamed her rage at the mountain, at the storm, at the unfairness of surviving so much only to die alone in the dark. She screamed until her voice cracked and failed, and then she drew another painful breath and screamed again. James Hartley was riding back to his ranch when he heard something that made him pull his horse to a sudden stop. He had been in town playing cards with some of the other ranchers, waiting out the worst of the storm in the saloon. The rain had finally stopped an hour ago, and James was eager to get back to check on his cattle and his 2 ranch hands who had stayed behind to mind the property. His ranch was about 2 miles outside of Silver Creek, and he knew these mountain roads well even in the dark. The sound came again, faint but unmistakable. A human voice, screaming. James turned his horse toward the sound, his heart beginning to pound. He was 26 years old, had been ranching in Colorado since he was 18, and he knew the mountains could be deadly. That sound meant someone was in serious trouble. He urged his horse into a gallop, following the direction of the screams. The road curved around the base of a hillside, and that was when he saw it. The mudslide had carved a massive scar down the mountain, a river of destruction at least 50 feet wide. Trees lay scattered like matchsticks. And somewhere beneath all that mud and debris, someone was screaming for help. James dismounted quickly, his boots sinking into the soft ground at the edge of the slide. The screaming had stopped, and for a terrible moment he thought he was too late. Then he heard it again, weaker this time, coming from somewhere in the middle of the devastation. He ran toward the sound, his eyes scanning the churned earth for any sign of a person or structure. Then he saw it, a piece of a wooden wall jutting up from the mud at an angle, part of what had clearly been a small cabin. His stomach dropped. Someone had been inside when the mountain came down. The screaming came again, and this time he could pinpoint it. There, near the collapsed structure. James began to dig with his bare hands, scooping away mud and throwing aside broken boards. The screaming had turned to sobbing now, which somehow made it worse. He worked frantically, his hands already bleeding from splinters and sharp rocks. He found a window frame and used it as a lever to pry up a section of collapsed roof. More mud poured through the gap, and he heard a choked cry from below. "Hold on," he shouted. "I am getting you out. Just hold on." He dug faster, throwing aside debris, following the sound of crying. His fingers hit something solid, a timber beam. He wrapped both hands around it and pulled with all his strength. The beam shifted, and suddenly he could see her. A woman's face covered in mud, her eyes wide with terror and hope. She was gasping for air, her lips blue with cold. "I have got you," James said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "You are going to be all right." He cleared the mud away from her face first, giving her room to breathe. Then he began the careful work of freeing the rest of her. Her right arm was pinned beneath a heavy beam, and he had to dig down and around it before he could lift the timber enough to pull her free. She cried out in pain when he moved the beam, and he saw her arm was badly bruised, but hopefully not broken. Her legs were buried under more mud and debris, and he worked methodically to clear it away, talking to her the whole time to keep her conscious and calm. "What is your name?" he asked as he dug. "Eliza," she managed to say through chattering teeth. "Eliza Morgan. I am James Hartley. My ranch is just down the road. We are going to get you out of here and get you warm." It took nearly half an hour of digging before he finally freed her legs. When he pulled her up out of the mud, she collapsed against him, unable to stand on her own. She was shaking violently, her clothes soaked through with mud and rainwater, her body temperature dangerously low. James did not hesitate. He lifted her into his arms and carried her to his horse. She weighed almost nothing, and he could feel every shudder that ran through her body. He managed to get into the saddle while holding her, settling her across his lap and wrapping his coat around her as best he could. She pressed her face against his chest, and he could feel her tears soaking through his shirt. He urged his horse into a steady trot, heading for his ranch. The ride seemed to take forever, and he kept talking to her, making sure she stayed conscious. "You are safe now," he said. "We will get you warm and dry. You are going to be fine." "My cabin," she whispered. "Everything I had." "Things can be replaced," James said firmly. "You are alive. That is what matters." When they finally reached his ranch, he carried her straight into the house, shouting for his ranch hands. His housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, was already awake, having heard the horse approach. She took one look at Eliza and immediately began issuing orders. Hot water, blankets, clean clothes. James carried Eliza to the guest room and set her gently on the bed. Mrs. Chen shooed him out so she could help Eliza out of her muddy clothes and into something warm and dry. James paced in the hallway outside, his heart still racing. He could not explain the fierce protectiveness he had felt the moment he saw her face in the mud, or the way his chest had tightened when she collapsed against him. He had saved people before, helped neighbors in trouble, but this felt different. The image of her terrified eyes would not leave his mind. Mrs. Chen finally emerged and told him that Eliza was cleaned up and resting but needed to see a doctor. Her arm was badly bruised and possibly sprained, and she had cuts and bruises all over. James immediately sent one of his ranch hands to town to fetch Doc Morrison. Then he sat in the chair outside the guest room, unwilling to go far, listening to the quiet sounds from inside. When Doc Morrison arrived an hour later, he examined Eliza thoroughly and pronounced that she was lucky to be alive. Her arm was indeed sprained but not broken, her ribs were bruised, and she had numerous cuts and contusions, but nothing life-threatening. She needed rest and warmth and food. The doctor left some laudanum for the pain, and strict instructions that she was not to be moved for at least a week. James assured him that Eliza could stay as long as she needed. After the doctor left, he finally allowed himself to enter the guest room. Eliza was propped up on pillows, her dark hair clean and drying in waves around her face. Without the mud, he could see that she was beautiful, with large brown eyes and delicate features. But it was the strength in her expression that struck him most, the set of her jaw that said she was not someone who gave up easily. "Thank you," she said when she saw him. Her voice was hoarse from screaming. "You saved my life." "I am glad I was riding by," James said, pulling a chair up beside the bed. "That was some storm." "I was foolish," Eliza said bitterly. "Everyone told me not to build so close to the hillside. I thought I knew better." "You could not have known the mountain would come down like that," James said. "That was the worst mudslide this area has seen in 20 years. You were just unlucky." "Everything I owned was in that cabin," Eliza said, and her eyes filled with tears. "I do not have anywhere else to go." "You can stay here," James said immediately, "for as long as you need. I have plenty of room, and Mrs. Chen will be glad for another woman around the place." Eliza looked at him with surprise and gratitude. "I cannot impose on you like that. You do not even know me." "You need a place to recover," James said simply, "and when you are well enough, we can figure out what comes next. But for now, you need to rest and heal." Tears spilled down Eliza's cheeks, and she wiped them away with her good hand. "You are very kind. I do not know how I will ever repay you." "You do not need to repay me," James said. "Just get better." Over the next few days, James found himself spending more and more time in the house rather than out working the ranch. He told himself he was just checking on his guest, making sure she had everything she needed. But the truth was he was drawn to Eliza in a way he could not quite explain. She was strong and independent, even flat on her back recovering from injuries. She did not complain about the pain, did not wallow in self-pity over losing everything. Instead, she asked Mrs. Chen if there was anything she could do to help from bed, offered to mend clothes or do other small tasks. Mrs. Chen had taken an immediate liking to Eliza, which was remarkable because Mrs. Chen did not like many people. The older woman had come to work for James 3 years ago, a Chinese immigrant who had lost her husband in a mining accident. She ran James's household with quiet efficiency and barely concealed disapproval of his bachelor lifestyle. But with Eliza, she was gentle and almost motherly, bringing her special teas and soups, sitting with her in the evenings to keep her company. James would often find them talking and laughing together, and something about the sound of Eliza's laughter made his chest feel warm. He started taking his meals in the guest room, sitting in the chair beside her bed while they ate and talked. He learned that she was from Kansas, that she had been married at 19 to a man named Thomas Morgan, that Thomas had died of fever just 2 years into their marriage. She had sold everything and come west looking for a fresh start, wanting to build something of her own. "I wanted to prove I could do it myself," she told him one evening. "Everyone back home said I was crazy to go alone, that a woman needed a man to survive out here. I wanted to show them they were wrong." "You have already proved that," James said. "You built a cabin with your own hands. You survived a winter alone. You survived being buried alive. That takes more strength than most men I know." Eliza smiled at him, a real smile that reached her eyes. "You do not think I was foolish?" "I think you were brave," James said honestly. "Foolish would be giving up. You did not give up, even when you were trapped under all that mud. You kept screaming until someone heard you." "Until you heard me?" Eliza said softly. "If you had not been riding by at that exact moment, I would have died there." "But you did not," James said. "You are here, you are alive, and you are going to be fine." As the days turned into a week, then 2 weeks, Eliza grew stronger. She was able to get out of bed and walk around the house, though her arm was still in a sling and her ribs still ached. James showed her around the ranch, and she was fascinated by everything. She had never been on a working cattle ranch before, and she asked him 100 questions about the animals, the land, the daily operations. He found himself enjoying explaining things to her, seeing his life through her curious, appreciative eyes. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after the mudslide, James took Eliza out to see the horses. She had mentioned that she loved to ride, and he thought it might lift her spirits. They walked to the corral together, and James introduced her to his favorite mare, a gentle chestnut named Rosie. Eliza stroked the horse's nose with her good hand, her face lighting up with joy. "She is beautiful," Eliza said. "Would you like to ride her?" James asked. "Just a short ride, nothing too strenuous." Eliza's eyes widened. "Are you sure? My arm is still healing?" "I will ride with you," James said. "We can share the saddle. I will make sure you do not fall." He saddled Rosie and helped Eliza mount, then swung up behind her. His arms came around her to hold the reins, and he was acutely aware of how perfectly she fit against him. He urged Rosie into a slow walk, taking them out onto the open range. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the mountains rose up in the distance, still capped with snow. Eliza leaned back against him slightly, and he heard her sigh with contentment. "This is beautiful," she said. "Thank you for this." "You are welcome," James said, his voice low. He realized in that moment that he did not want her to leave. The thought of her recovering and moving on, going back to town or somewhere else, filled him with an unexpected sense of loss. In just 3 weeks, she had become part of his daily life in a way he had not anticipated. He looked forward to seeing her at breakfast, to their long conversations in the evening, to the sound of her laughter echoing through his house. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, and then Eliza spoke again. "James, I have been thinking about what I'm going to do. I need to find work, a way to support myself. I cannot stay at your ranch forever, as much as you and Mrs. Chen have made me feel welcome." "You can stay as long as you like," James said immediately. "There is no rush." "You have been more than generous," Eliza said, "but I need to stand on my own feet again. I was thinking perhaps I could find work in town, maybe at the general store or as a seamstress." James hesitated, then made a decision. "What if you stayed here? What if you worked here at the ranch?" Eliza turned her head to look at him, surprised. "Doing what?" "Mrs. Chen has been saying she needs help," James said, which was not entirely true, but could be made true. "The house is big, and during cattle season we have extra hands who need feeding, and I've been thinking about getting some chickens, maybe some pigs. You could manage that, help build that up. It would be real work, real pay. You would have your own room, and you would be contributing, not just accepting charity." Eliza was quiet for a long moment. "Are you offering me this because you feel sorry for me?" "No," James said honestly. "I'm offering because I want you to stay, because I like having you here, because in 3 weeks you have become part of this place, and I do not want to see you go." He felt her body relax against him, and when she spoke, her voice was warm. "Then I accept. I would like to stay." Over the following months, Eliza threw herself into life at the ranch. She helped Mrs. Chen with the cooking and cleaning, and she proved to be excellent with animals. James bought chickens, as he had mentioned, and Eliza built a proper coop for them and tended them with care. The eggs became a small source of income when she started selling them in town. She also started a vegetable garden, coaxing life from the Colorado soil with determination and skill. James found himself looking for excuses to be near her. He would offer to help with the garden or suggest they ride out to check on the cattle together. They fell into an easy partnership, their conversations ranging from practical ranch matters to deeper topics about their dreams and fears and pasts. Eliza told him about her marriage to Thomas, how it had been comfortable but not passionate, how she had cared for him but had not been sure she truly loved him. She felt guilty about that, especially after he died. James shared things with her that he had never told anyone, about how he had come to Colorado as a young man fleeing his father's expectations back in Virginia. His father had wanted him to be a lawyer, to take over the family practice, but James had wanted to work with his hands to build something real. They had fought bitterly, and James had left without looking back. He had not spoken to his father in 8 years. Do you ever regret it? Eliza asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the stars come out. Sometimes I regret how it happened, James admitted. I wish we could have parted on better terms, but I do not regret the choice. This life, this ranch, this is who I am meant to be. I understand that, Eliza said. That is how I felt about coming west. It was the first time I made a choice just for myself, not because it was expected or proper, but because it was what I wanted. James looked at her profile in the fading light and realized he was in love with her. The realization should have surprised him, but instead it felt like acknowledging something he had known for a while. He loved her strength, her independence, her kindness. He loved the way she laughed, the way she pushed her hair back when she was concentrating, the way she never complained even when things were hard. He loved her, but he did not say anything. Not. Eliza had been through so much, lost so much. She needed time and space to heal, to figure out what she wanted. He would not pressure her or make her feel obligated to him just because he had saved her life and given her a place to stay. So he kept his feelings to himself and tried to be content with her friendship and her presence. Summer arrived, and with it came the hard work of running the ranch. James hired extra hands for the cattle drives, and the ranch became a bustling place. Eliza helped feed the workers, and she charmed every single one of them with her warmth and her excellent cooking. James found himself feeling jealous when the young cowboys would linger after meals to talk with her, and he had to force himself to be reasonable. She was free to talk to whoever she wanted. One of the hands, a young man named Billy Tucker, seemed particularly smitten with Eliza. He was always offering to help her with tasks, bringing her wildflowers, making her laugh with his stories. James tried not to let it bother him, but it did. One evening he saw Billy and Eliza walking together near the barn, and something inside him snapped. He strode over, his jaw tight. "Billy, the horses need tending," he said, his voice sharper than he intended. Billy looked surprised. "I was just about to do that, boss." "Then you should get to it," James said. Billy glanced at Eliza, tipped his hat, and walked away. Eliza looked at James with raised eyebrows. "That was rude." "He has work to do," James said. "He was off duty," Eliza said, "and we were just talking." "He's too young for you anyway," James said, and immediately regretted it. Eliza's eyes narrowed. "Too young for me? James Hartley, what exactly are you implying?" "Nothing," James said. "I'm not implying anything." "You are acting like a jealous fool," Eliza said, and there was heat in her voice. "Billy is a nice young man who was telling me about his family back in Texas. That is all. And even if it were more, it would be none of your business." "You are right," James said stiffly. "It is none of my business. Excuse me." He turned and walked away, angry at himself for his behavior. He went to the barn and threw himself into work, grooming the horses with more force than necessary. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to see Eliza standing in the doorway, her arms crossed. "Why did you really send Billy away?" she asked quietly. James put down the brush and faced her. "Because I did not want to watch him flirt with you." "Why not?" "Because it bothers me," James admitted. "Because I do not like seeing other men try to win your affection." "Why does it bother you?" Eliza pressed, taking a step closer. James ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "You know why, Eliza." "I want to hear you say it," she said, and her voice was soft now. James looked at her, at her beautiful face in the lamplight, at the way she was looking at him with those deep brown eyes, and he could not hold it back any longer. "Because I am in love with you. I have been in love with you since I pulled you out of that mud. I think about you every moment of every day. I want to be near you all the time. I want to make you laugh. I want to protect you and support you and share my life with you. That is why it bothers me." Eliza stared at him for a long moment, and James felt his heart pounding. Then she closed the distance between them and reached up with her hand to touch his face. "You foolish, wonderful man," she said. "I have been in love with you too. I've been waiting for you to say something." James felt like he could not breathe. "You have?" "Yes," Eliza said, smiling. "How could I not love you? You saved my life. You gave me a home. You treated me like an equal, not like some fragile thing that needed to be handled with care. You made me feel strong again. You made me feel alive." James pulled her into his arms and kissed her, and it was like coming home. She wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back with equal passion. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, James rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "I know it is fast and I know you might want more time, but I do not want to wait. I want you to be my wife." "Yes," Eliza said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married a month later in the little church in Silver Creek. The whole town turned out for the wedding, curious about the young widow who had nearly died in the mudslide and the rancher who had saved her. Mrs. Chen cried during the ceremony, and even Billy Tucker congratulated them with genuine warmth. Eliza wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Chen had helped her make, and James wore his best suit. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, James kissed Eliza with such joy that the congregation broke into applause. They had a small reception at the ranch with food and music and dancing under the stars. James held Eliza close as they swayed to the music, and he felt like the luckiest man alive. She was his wife now, truly part of his life in every way. When the last of the guests had left and they were finally alone, James carried Eliza over the threshold of their bedroom, making her laugh. "You already saved me once," she teased. "You do not have to keep carrying me everywhere." "I like carrying you," James said, setting her gently on the bed, "and I plan to keep saving you for the rest of our lives." "Then I suppose I will have to keep saving you right back," Eliza said, pulling him down beside her. Their first year of marriage was hard work but filled with happiness. They expanded the ranch together, adding more cattle and more land. Eliza's chicken and egg business grew, and she started selling vegetables and preserves in town as well. She had a head for business, and James relied on her judgment more and more. They were true partners in every sense of the word. When Eliza told James she was expecting a child, he was overwhelmed with joy. He had always wanted a family, but he had resigned himself to bachelorhood before Eliza came into his life. Now he was going to be a father, and the thought filled him with equal parts excitement and terror. "What if I am not good at it?" he asked Eliza one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting on her growing belly. "You will be wonderful," Eliza said confidently. "You are kind and patient and strong. You will teach our child everything they need to know." "What if something goes wrong?" James said, voicing his deepest fear. "What if I lose you?" Eliza took his hand and squeezed it. "You are not going to lose me. I survived a mudslide, remember? I am tougher than I look." She was right. When their son was born in the spring of 1883, Eliza came through the labor strong and healthy. James held his son for the first time and felt tears streaming down his face. They named him Samuel Thomas Hartley, Samuel for James's grandfather and Thomas for Eliza's first husband. James appreciated that Eliza wanted to honor Thomas's memory, and he felt no jealousy about it. Thomas had been part of her life, part of her journey, and James respected that. Samuel was a healthy, happy baby with his mother's dark hair and his father's blue eyes. James was a devoted father, often found walking the floor with Samuel at night when the baby was fussy, singing old songs his own mother had sung to him. Eliza would watch them from the bed, her heart full of love for both of them. 2 years later, they had a daughter, whom they named Rose Elizabeth. She was a tiny, fierce thing from the moment she was born, with a strong will and her mother's determination. James adored both his children equally, and he worked hard to provide them with a good life and a stable home. The ranch continued to prosper. James's hard work and Eliza's business sense made them one of the most successful ranching families in the area. They hired more help, built a bigger house, and became pillars of the Silver Creek community. But despite their success, they never forgot where they started or how they found each other. Every year on the anniversary of the mudslide, James and Eliza would ride out to the place where her cabin had been. The scar on the hillside had healed over time, covered with new growth, but they could still see the path the mud had taken. They would sit on their horses and remember that terrifying night, and then they would thank God for bringing them together. "If that storm had not come, we never would have met," Eliza said one year, as they sat looking at the hillside. "I hate that you went through that," James said, "but I am grateful every day that I was riding by when I was. I cannot imagine my life without you." "We were meant to find each other," Eliza said. "The mudslide did not destroy me. It brought me to you." As the years passed, Samuel grew into a strong, responsible young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Rose became a teacher in Silver Creek, beloved by her students for her patience and creativity. James and Eliza watched their children grow with pride and joy, knowing they had built something lasting. Mrs. Chen remained with them until she passed peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78. She had become like a mother to both James and Eliza, and they mourned her deeply. But they also celebrated her life and the love she had shown them over the years. When James and Eliza were in their 50s, they finally took a trip back to Kansas so Eliza could visit Thomas's grave. She had not been back since she left, and she wanted to pay her respects. James held her hand as she stood at the gravestone, and when she was ready, they walked away together. That chapter of her life was closed, honored, but finished. Her life was with James now, had been for decades. They also made a trip to Virginia so James could reconcile with his father. The old man was in his 80s by then, frail but still sharp-minded. When James walked into his childhood home with Eliza by his side, his father looked at him for a long moment, then smiled. "You look happy," his father said simply. "I am," James said, "and I want you to know my family." They spent 2 weeks in Virginia, and by the end of the visit, James had made peace with his past. His father admitted that he had been wrong to try to force James into a life he did not want, and James forgave him. When they parted, it was with love and understanding. Samuel took over the running of the ranch when James was in his 60s, allowing James and Eliza to slow down and enjoy their later years together. They would sit on the porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching the sun set over the mountains. They had grandchildren now, 5 of them, and the house was often filled with the sounds of children playing. Eliza never lost her independence or her strength. Even in her 70s, she was still tending her garden, still managing the household, still full of life and laughter. James loved her more with each passing year, finding new depths to his feelings that he had not known were possible. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching their grandchildren play in the yard, Eliza turned to James and smiled. "Do you ever think about that night? The mudslide?" "Sometimes," James said, "usually when it rains hard." "It was the worst night of my life," Eliza said, "and also the beginning of the best part of my life. Funny how that works." "Not funny," James said, bringing her hand to his lips. "Just lucky. We were both very lucky." "Not luck," Eliza said. "Fate. We were meant to be together, James. The universe just had a dramatic way of making sure we met." James laughed and pulled her close. "Well, I am grateful to the universe then, and to that mudslide, and to every moment that led me to you." They sat together as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant colors. The ranch stretched out before them, the land they had built together, the legacy they would leave their children. But more than the land or the success or the material things, what mattered was this: the two of them together, still in love after all these years. Eliza rested her head on James's shoulder and sighed contentedly. "I love you, James Hartley." "I love you too, Eliza Hartley," James said. "I always will." And he did, every day for the rest of their long, happy lives together. The mudslide that had nearly killed Eliza had instead brought her the greatest love she would ever know, and neither of them would have changed a single moment of their journey together. They had weathered storms, both literal and metaphorical, had built a life and a family, had loved each other through joy and sorrow, triumph and hardship, and in the end, that was all that mattered. They had found each other, saved each other, and loved each other until their last breaths, two souls bound together by fate and sealed by the kind of love that only comes once in a lifetime.